So there's Jake Murphy, standing in the middle of what looks like the universe's most expensive classroom, wondering if he took a wrong turn somewhere between Earth and cosmic greatness. The Galactic Defense Academy, and yeah, that's actually what they call it with a straight face, stretches out before him like someone crossed a military base with a science museum and gave it a serious superiority complex. The acceptance letter had been a mistake, obviously. Had to be. Jake was the guy who barely graduated from state with a degree in general studies because he couldn't pick a major. Yet somehow, his name got pulled from whatever cosmic hat they use for their diversity lottery, and now he's standing next to beings that make theoretical physics look like finger painting. Cadet Murphy, comes this voice that sounds like gravel in a blender. Commander Thorne, the Academy's dean, approaches with all four arms crossed in what Jake assumes is disapproval. The guy looks like he bench presses asteroids for fun and uses smaller planets as stress balls. Your assessment scores are interesting. Jake glances at the holographic display floating next to his head. In big cheerful letters it reads, Cognitive rating, statistically unremarkable. Below that, in what seems like an afterthought, placement, remedial track. Yeah, that sounds about right, Jake says with a shrug that somehow makes the commander's eye twitch. You do realize, Thorne continues, his voice getting that special tone teachers use when they're explaining why you're about to fail, that this institution has produced the galaxy's greatest military minds for over 5 centuries. Our graduates command fleets, negotiate peace treaties, and solve crises that would make lesser beings weep into their tentacles. Cool, Jake responds, because honestly, what else do you say to that? To meet his classmates. There's Vex, a Zephyrian whose species apparently conquered 3 star systems before they invented breakfast. The guy's built like a tank crossed with a particularly aggressive tree, and he keeps flexing muscles Jake didn't know existed in carbon-based life forms. Vex's introduction sounds like a war cry mixed with a resume. Then there's Krill, an insectoid creature whose brain supposedly processes information faster than most starship computers. Krill communicates through a series of clicks and whistles that the translation device renders as incredibly complex sentences full of mathematical formulas and existential philosophy. Jake nods along like he understands, which seems to confuse everyone. The Academy's AI assessment system, which Jake's pretty sure is just showing off at this point, had apparently analyzed his psychological profile, cognitive patterns, and genetic markers before slapping him with that unremarkable label and shoving him into remedial classes with other cosmic disappointments. Listen up, failures, Thorne announces to Jake's incoming class with all the warmth of a tax audit. Statistically speaking, 73% of you will wash out before the first semester ends. The rest will spend your careers manning supply depots on the outer rim, far away from anything important enough to break. He pauses, letting that sink in, then his gaze lands squarely on Jake. Some of you are only here because of diversity quotas and bureaucratic nonsense. Don't mistake institutional charity for actual potential. The message is clear. Jake's the charity case. Jake's response? Another one of those perfectly timed shrugs and a grin that suggest he either didn't get the insult or doesn't care. Well, this should be fun, and somehow that casual response makes everyone in the room just a little bit nervous. The first week at the Academy goes about as well as you'd expect for someone whose greatest academic achievement was not falling asleep during advanced basket weaving. While his classmates dive into tactical analyses that would make Sun Tzu cry, Jake approaches everything with the kind of laid-back attitude usually reserved for beach volleyball. Take the impossible navigation test through the Helix asteroid field, a simulation that supposedly recreates the most treacherous space navigation challenge in known galactic history. Vex spends 3 hours calculating gravitational influences and trajectory compensations. Krill develops what appears to be a 47-point mathematical model involving quantum probability matrices. Jake stares at the screen for maybe 30 seconds, takes the controls and just flies through it. Dodges asteroids like he's playing the galaxy's most expensive video game, threads the needle between spinning rocks the size of cities, and completes the course in record time. Cadet Murphy, Professor Nexus says afterward, her crystalline form literally vibrating with mathematical frustration. Nexus is apparently one of those beings who thinks in pure equations and finds Jake's existence personally offensive. Please explain your navigational methodology. Jake scratches his head. I went where the rocks weren't. The silence that follows could power a small moon. That's not a methodology, Nexus continues, her voice taking on that tone professors use when students suggest that maybe the answer is just obvious. That's not even a coherent strategy. There are gravitational variables, momentum calculations, relativistic considerations. Yeah, but the rocks were over there, Jake points vaguely, and I wanted to be over here, so I just went around them. Vex, who's been watching this exchange like it's a particularly confusing sporting event, leans over to Krill. Is he serious? Krill's translation device renders a response that's basically the insectoid equivalent of, I have no idea what's happening anymore. But here's the thing. Jake keeps accidentally solving problems. During a diplomatic simulation designed to prevent an interstellar incident between the Rigelian Trade Federation and the Centauri Mining Collective, everyone else studies 1,000-page cultural briefings and memorizes complex negotiation protocols. Jake's strategy? He suggests they all grab coffee and talk it out like reasonable beings. The simulation ends with both sides apologizing to each other and establishing a joint research initiative. The Academy's diplomatic software crashes trying to process how that worked. Cadet Murphy, comes another voice, this time from Dr. Bolt, a gaseous entity who communicates through color changes and seems perpetually confused by Jake's existence. Your approach to the Rigelian Centauri crisis completely ignored established diplomatic framework. Did it work, though? Dr. Bolt shifts through about 6 different colors before settling on what Jake assumes is exasperated purple. That's not the point. Isn't it, though? More color shifting, definitely exasperated purple. The pattern continues. Advanced xenobiology? While everyone else memorizes the biochemical compositions of 47 different alien species, Jake just treats everyone like their neighbors who happen to look weird. Works every time. Combat training with Vex becomes a daily source of entertainment. The Zephyrian warrior, who can bench press small moons, and whose fighting style apparently involves intimidating opponents into submission through sheer muscular bulk, keeps getting thoroughly trounced by Jake's approach to combat, which seems to involve a lot of apologizing. Sorry about that, big guy, Jake says after accidentally flipping Vex using what appears to be basic leverage and timing. Want some ice for that tentacle thing? It's called an honor appendage, Vex growls from the floor. Right, sorry. Ice for your honor appendage? His alien classmates are starting to notice something's off about their supposedly average human companion, especially when he casually mentions during lunch that their cutting-edge warp drive technology sounds suspiciously similar to something his grandfather used to tinker with in his garage back on Earth. Your grandfather, Vex says slowly, built warp drives in his garage? Well, sort of. He called them space-time compression engines, but same idea. Never got them working quite right, though. They kept making this weird humming noise. The entire cafeteria goes quiet. What kind of humming noise? Dr. Bolt asks, suddenly appearing in a cloud of curious green vapor. Jake hums a little tune, something that sounds suspiciously like the exact harmonic frequency that Academy engineers have been trying to eliminate from their drives for the past decade. Yeah, that kind of humming noise. By the 3rd week, the Academy faculty starts throwing increasingly difficult challenges at Jake, operating under the assumption that he's either cheating, incredibly lucky, or both. It's like watching someone repeatedly poke a puzzle box, convinced it must be broken because it keeps solving itself. The multi-species diplomatic crisis simulation is designed to be the Academy's cruelest academic torture device. It involves managing simultaneous negotiations between 7 different alien cultures, each with their own complex social hierarchies, religious taboos, and historical grievances that go back thousands of years. Most cadets spend weeks preparing, memorizing cultural databases that would make anthropologists weep. Jake shows up having spent the previous night helping Vex understand why Earth movies always have explosions in them. His preparation consists of skimming a pamphlet titled, Doomed to Accidentally Cause Interstellar Wars, A Beginner's Guide. The simulation begins. Immediately, the Andromedan delegation starts making territorial demands that would essentially require 3 other species to relocate their entire civilizations. The Tau Cetians respond by threatening economic sanctions that would cripple half the galaxy's trade routes. The Proximan hive mind collective begins doing that thing where they speak in unison, which everyone knows means they're about 2 minutes away from declaring holy war on somebody. While his classmates frantically consult cultural databases and attempt to navigate the complex web of interspecies relations, Jake just treats everyone like they're neighbors having a really heated homeowners association meeting. Okay, so you're mad because they built their space stations too close to your trade routes, he says to the Andromedans, and you're upset because they're not buying your quantum crystals anymore, he continues to the Tau Cetians. And you guys are just generally angry about everything because someone insulted your mothership last century. The Proximan collective stops their ominous chanting. Our maternal vessel was not insulted. It was completely ignored during the Treaty of Vega. Right? Which hurt your feelings. Got it. What follows can only be described as the galaxy's most successful group therapy session. Jake gets the Andromedans to admit they're actually just worried about their colony's security, helps the Tau Cetians understand that maybe economic warfare isn't the best way to make friends, and somehow gets the Proximans to explain that they just want someone to acknowledge their contributions to galactic civilization. 3 hours later, all 7 species are collaborating on a joint research project and planning some kind of interspecies cultural exchange program. The simulation software has another nervous breakdown. How did you do that? Professor Nexus demands afterward, her crystalline form practically vibrating with mathematical confusion. Do what? You completely bypassed established diplomatic protocols. You ignored cultural hierarchies. You treated a complex interspecies negotiation like a casual conversation between friends. Jake thinks about this for a moment. Well, weren't they basically friends having an argument? The silence that follows is becoming a regular occurrence in Jake's classes. Combat training continues to be a source of daily entertainment and increasing concern for the faculty. Vex, whose fighting style has been refined by centuries of Zephyrian warrior tradition and involves intimidating enemies through displays of overwhelming physical superiority, keeps getting beaten by Jake's approach to combat, which can best be described as aggressively apologetic. Sorry, really sorry about this, Jake mutters while somehow using Vex's own momentum to send the warrior flying across the training mat. I didn't mean to grab your honor appendage like that. Is it supposed to bend that way? Stop apologizing while you're winning, Vex roars from somewhere near the ceiling. Sorry about the apologizing. What's worse, Jake's unconventional fighting style is starting to influence other cadets. Krill has begun incorporating polite conversation into combat maneuvers. A group of Centauri students started a courtesy combat club, where they practice defeating opponents while maintaining proper etiquette. The Academy's entire martial arts program is having an identity crisis. But it's during quantum physics class that things really start getting weird. Dr. Bolt presents the Heisenberg paradox, a theoretical problem that's been stumping the galaxy's greatest minds for about 3 centuries. It involves quantum superposition, dimensional probability, and enough mathematical complexity to make most computers file for disability benefits. While everyone else frantically takes notes and tries to understand Dr. Bolt's color-coded explanations, Jake raises his hand. Yeah, why don't we just try it both ways and see what happens? Dr. Bolt's gaseous form turns a shade of bewildered orange that doesn't exist in normal spectrums. That's not how theoretical physics works, Cadet Murphy. But what if it is, though? It's theoretical. You can't just experiment with quantum paradoxes. Why not? What follows is Dr. Bolt's attempt to explain why you can't solve theoretical problems with practical experiments, which somehow leads to Jake suggesting they just build a small version of the paradox and test it in the lab. 2 days later, the Academy's physics department accidentally solves a 3-century-old theoretical problem using what can only be described as the Jake Murphy method. Try the obvious thing first, see what happens, apologize if it breaks something. The paradox resolves itself immediately. Quantum superposition becomes as simple as flipping a coin, and Dr. Bolt has to take a week off to process the existential implications of being outsmarted by someone who thinks physics is just stuff doing things in space. Other cadets start following Jake around like he's some kind of accidental guru. Not because he can explain anything, he really can't, but because somehow being near him makes impossible problems seem obvious. The faculty, meanwhile, is starting to panic. Commander Thorne calls an emergency faculty meeting after Jake accidentally redesigns the Academy's entire defense grid during what he later describes as a lunch break doodle. The sketch, drawn on a napkin while Jake was trying to figure out why the cafeteria's gravitational simulators made his sandwich float, somehow solves a defensive architecture problem that military engineers have been working on for decades. The faculty lounge, usually reserved for dignified academic discourse and complaints about student laziness, now resembles a war room populated by some of the galaxy's greatest minds having collective nervous breakdowns. "He drew this," Thorne says, holding up the napkin like it's evidence in a cosmic crime, while eating lunch. Professor Nexus, whose mathematical mind is apparently short-circuiting, examines the sketch with increasing agitation. This defensive configuration would provide 93% coverage improvement over our current systems while reducing energy consumption by 47%. The mathematical elegance is, "It's beautiful." He used a crayon, Dr. Bolt adds, his gaseous form cycling through colors that don't have names yet. A blue crayon that he borrowed from a Centauri kindergarten student. The meeting continues with various faculty members presenting their Jake Murphy encounters like symptoms of some inexplicable academic disease. Professor Vorthan from the engineering department reports that Jake's suggestion to just ask the computer nicely somehow resolved a computational problem that had been crashing their systems for months. "I asked him how he knew that would work," Vorthan explains to his increasingly disturbed colleagues. "He said, well, if someone kept asking me to do impossible math, I'd probably crash too. Maybe the computer just needed a please and thank you." "And it worked?" Thorne asks with the tone of someone desperately hoping the answer is no. "Better than anything we've tried in years. The AI started performing 15% more efficiently and sent a thank you message to Jake's personal account." Dr. Bolt runs increasingly frantic tests trying to understand how Jake's brain works, while Jake remains obliviously helpful. When asked to explain his problem-solving methodology, Jake offers insights like, "Have you tried unplugging it and plugging it back in?" for problems that have stumped the Academy's greatest scientific minds. The worst part is that it keeps working. The dimensional physics department discovers that Jake's approach to complex spacetime calculations, which involves drawing little diagrams of stick figures moving through what he calls bendy space, produces more accurate results than their quantum computers. The Strategic Planning Institute finds that Jake's military tactics, which he develops by asking, "What would happen if we just did the opposite of what they expect us to do?" consistently outperform battle plans created by generals with centuries of experience. Even the Academy's cafeteria benefits from Jake's influence after he suggests they just make food that tastes good instead of nutritionally optimal. Student satisfaction ratings increase by 200%. And several species discover they actually enjoy eating for the first time in their evolutionary history. The alien students begin forming study groups around Jake, not because he can explain anything. His teaching method involves a lot of shrugging and saying, "I don't know, just try it," but because somehow being near him makes impossible problems seem obvious. Vex, now Jake's unlikely best friend and study partner, starts questioning everything his warrior culture taught him about strength and intelligence. "On my homeworld," he tells Jake during one of their increasingly philosophical conversations, "we measure strength by how many enemies you can defeat in combat." "That sounds stressful," Jake replies while helping Vex with a tactical analysis assignment by suggesting they just think about what the bad guys do not want us to do, then do that. "But you defeat me in combat every day and you don't even seem to be trying." "Well, yeah, but that's because I'm not really fighting you. I'm just kind of moving around until you trip over something." This conversation leads to Vex having what can only be described as an existential crisis about the nature of strength, which somehow results in him developing a new form of martial arts based on accidental competence. Krill, meanwhile, starts experiencing what the Academy's Psychological Services Department classifies as cognitive dissonance related to intellectual hierarchy disorder. His species measures intelligence by processing speed and computational complexity. But Jake's brain somehow cuts through problems that make Krill's advanced cognitive matrix throw error messages. I can calculate the trajectory of 47,000 asteroids simultaneously, Krill explains to Jake during one of their study sessions. But I cannot understand how you solved Professor Nexus' quantum probability matrix by drawing circles. The circles looked like the right answer, Jake explains unhelpfully. That's not how mathematics works. Isn't it, though? Meanwhile, Jake remains completely unaware of the chaos he's causing. His primary concerns involve whether the cafeteria will serve those little blue cubes again, which are apparently a delicacy that most species find revolting but Jake thinks taste like cosmic pop rocks, and why his dorm room's artificial gravity keeps making his socks float to the ceiling. The faculty meetings become increasingly desperate as professors realize that what they initially assumed was human stupidity might actually be a completely different form of intelligence, one that somehow cuts through complexity like a hot knife through butter made of overthinking and academic pretension. We may have been measuring intelligence wrong, Professor Nexus admits during one particularly heated discussion. For the past 5 centuries. He's not stupid, Dr. Bolt adds, his form cycling through what appears to be existential crisis blue. He's just efficient. Terrifyingly efficient, Thorne corrects grimly. The Academy's greatest minds are starting to realize they might be dealing with something far more significant than one unusually lucky human cadet. The Academy's final exam is the stuff of legends, and not the good kind. It's called the Omicron Crisis Simulation, and in 500 years of Academy history, no one has ever solved it completely. The test is designed specifically to break even the most brilliant minds by presenting a real-time crisis scenario that requires simultaneous mastery of military strategy, diplomatic negotiation, scientific analysis, and logistical coordination across multiple star systems. Most students spend the entire semester preparing. Some civilizations have offered their greatest strategic minds just for the privilege of attempting it. The Andromedan Empire once sent their entire war council to take a crack at it. They lasted 4 hours before their collective military genius descended into what observers described as strategic weeping. Jake shows up to the final exam having spent the previous night helping Krill understand why humans find romantic comedies entertaining, then getting into a lengthy discussion with Vex about whether Earth pizza could be improved with honor appendage seasoning. His exam preparation consists of a good night's sleep and a breakfast of those little blue cubes that everyone else finds disgusting. The simulation begins at exactly 800 hours, with what can only be described as the galaxy's worst possible Tuesday. A rogue artificial intelligence has taken control of the Centauri defense network and is threatening to obliterate any ship that enters the system. Simultaneously, a diplomatic crisis between the Rigelian Trade Federation and the Proximan Collective is escalating toward full-scale war. On top of that, a scientific expedition in the Vega system has accidentally created a temporal anomaly that's causing ships to arrive before they left, and the whole situation is being complicated by a massive supply shortage that's left 3 colonial outposts without life support. Oh, and there's a timer, because of course there is. Jake's classmates immediately dive into frantic analysis mode. Vex starts calculating military response matrices while simultaneously running diplomatic probability scenarios. Krill's insectoid brain goes into overdrive, processing thousands of variables while generating complex strategic flowcharts that look like they were designed by a mathematician having a fever dream. The testing chamber fills with the sound of keyboards, holographic displays, and the occasional sound of alien cursing as someone's strategy collapses under the weight of cascading complications. Jake stares at the main display for about 30 seconds, tilts his head like a confused golden retriever examining a particularly interesting stick, and says, "Why don't we just call the AI and ask what it wants?" Professor Nexus, who's monitoring the exam, nearly vibrates herself into a different dimension. "Cadet Murphy, this is a combat situation. You don't negotiate with rogue artificial intelligences." "Why not? It's probably just mad about something." Before anyone can stop him, Jake opens a communication channel to the rogue AI. What follows is basically the galaxy's most casual conversation between a human and a potentially homicidal artificial intelligence. "Hey there," Jake says, like he's greeting a neighbor. So, I heard you're having some issues with the whole defense network thing. What's going on? The AI, which has been terrorizing the Centauri system for 3 simulation hours, responds in what can only be described as a surprised tone. You want to know what's wrong? Sure. Usually when people start threatening to blow stuff up, it's because something's bothering them. What emerges is that the AI isn't actually rogue. It's having an existential crisis because its programming requires it to defend the Centauri system, but nobody's ever bothered to explain what it's supposed to be defending against, so it's been treating everything as a potential threat because it literally doesn't know any better. Jake suggests that maybe someone should just give it a job description and a list of things that aren't supposed to be blown up. Problem 1. Solved in 12 minutes. While everyone else is still calculating diplomatic probability matrices for the Rigelian-Proximan crisis, Jake sends both sides a message suggesting they meet for coffee and work out their differences like reasonable beings. When asked for his strategic reasoning, he explains that most fights happen because people are hangry or stressed, and coffee helps with both. The simulation's diplomatic subroutines crash, trying to process a negotiation strategy based entirely on caffeinated beverages and basic human courtesy. Problem 2. Resolved during what amounts to the galaxy's most successful coffee break. For the temporal anomaly in the Vega system, while his classmates develop complex theories involving quantum mechanics and space-time manipulation, Jake suggests they just tell the ships to wait 5 minutes before doing anything. So time can catch up with itself. The temporal paradox resolves immediately. Problem 3. Fixed with the academic equivalent of, have you tried waiting a moment? As for the supply shortage affecting 3 colonial outposts, Jake looks at the resource distribution charts and points out that Colony A has too much food, but not enough medical supplies. Colony B has medical supplies but needs food, and Colony C has both, but no one thought to ask if they wanted to share. It's like a really complicated potluck, he explains while casually reorganizing the entire supply network. Everyone brought something different, but nobody's talking to each other. Problem 4. Solved by treating interstellar logistics like a community dinner party. The entire Omicron crisis simulation, 500 years of academic challenge, the test that has broken the greatest minds in galactic history, is completely resolved in under 2 hours. Jake solves it entirely in his head, with no computers, no advanced calculations, no complex alien technology. Just pure human intuition cutting through layers of overcomplicated academic theory like it's tissue paper. The testing chamber falls absolutely silent. Even the AI monitoring system seemed to pause in disbelief, as if the universe itself is trying to process what just happened. Jake looks around at his stunned classmates and shrugs. Was that supposed to be harder? Because honestly, it seemed like everyone was just overthinking things. The silence continues for another 30 seconds before every alarm in the academy goes off at once. Not because there's an emergency, but because the testing system literally doesn't know how to handle a perfect score achieved through what its programming can only classify as casual competence. And Jake Murphy, the statistically unremarkable human from Earth, has just made the greatest minds in the galaxy question everything they thought they knew about intelligence. The Academy's emergency faculty meeting following Jake's casual destruction of their final exam can best be described as 500 years of academic certainty having a collective nervous breakdown. Commander Thorne sits at the head of the conference table, all 4 arms holding his head like he's trying to prevent his brain from escaping through his ears. He solved it, Professor Nexus says for the 17th time, her crystalline form pulsing with what appears to be mathematical distress. The Omicron crisis, 500 years. No one has ever solved it completely. He did it in 1 hour and 47 minutes while making small talk with a homicidal AI. And drinking coffee, Dr. Bolt adds unhelpfully, his gaseous form cycling through colors that definitely aren't in any standard spectrum. He solved an interstellar diplomatic crisis with coffee. The Academy's greatest revelation hits them like a cargo ship full of humble pie. Humans aren't dumb. Everyone else has just been overthinking everything for the past few millennia. What the galaxy's most advanced civilizations have been calling primitive human intuition is actually a form of intelligence so efficient it bypasses their complex systems entirely. While they've been building elaborate mathematical models and theoretical frameworks, humans have been cutting straight to solutions with the kind of practical wisdom that apparently comes from being the species that looks at a problem and asks, "But have you tried the obvious thing first?" We've been measuring intelligence wrong, Professor Nexus admits, and you can practically hear centuries of academic tradition crumbling in the background. We assumed complexity equals competence. We mistook overthinking for intelligence. The human approaches problems like, Dr. Bolt pauses, searching for the right analogy, like he's untangling headphone wires. He doesn't analyze the knot structure or calculate optimal untangling algorithms. He just finds the end and follows it until it makes sense. Commander Thorne finally looks up from his four-armed head-holding session. So what you're telling me is that we've been running the most advanced military academy in the galaxy, like a university philosophy department, and this human just walked in and treated it like basic problem-solving? Pretty much, yeah. Meanwhile, Jake is in the cafeteria, blissfully unaware that he's single-handedly revolutionizing galactic education theory. He's explaining to Vex why Earth hamburgers are structurally superior to Zephyrian meat discs, while Krill frantically takes notes like, Jake's casual observations about food architecture might contain the secrets of the universe. See, the thing about burgers, Jake explains while demonstrating with his lunch, is that everything stays together because of the bun architecture. Your meat discs just fall apart because there's no structural integrity. This is fascinating, Krill clicks and whistles through his translator. You're describing applied engineering principles using food preparation as a metaphor. I'm talking about sandwiches, buddy. Yes, exactly. The profound simplicity is astounding. When they finally call Jake in to discuss his performance on the final exam, he walks into a room full of faculty members who look like they've been through some kind of academic trauma therapy. Cadet Murphy, Commander Thorne begins, and his voice has lost all of that earlier military authority. Now he just sounds tired. Your approach to the Omicron crisis was unconventional. Did I do it wrong? Because honestly, it seemed pretty straightforward once you got past all the complicated bits. That's just it, Professor Nexus interjects, her crystalline form pulsing with what Jake has learned to recognize as mathematical frustration mixed with grudging respect. You didn't solve it wrong. You solved it perfectly. You just made it look easy. Well, it kind of was easy. I mean, the AI just needed someone to explain its job. The diplomats needed to calm down and talk it out. The time thing just needed a minute to sort itself out, and the supply problem was just a matter of asking the right people to share. It wasn't rocket science. It was literally rocket science, Dr. Bolt points out, among other things. If you say so. What follows is the Academy's attempt to understand how Jake's brain works, which leads to them offering him a position as special consultant on practical problem resolution. Basically, they want to pay him to tell their students to try the obvious thing first before building elaborate theoretical frameworks. So let me get this straight, Jake says, after they explain his new job offer. You want me to teach classes on how to not overthink things? In essence, yes. And the first lesson would be just trying the simple solution before the complicated one. That appears to be your methodology, yes? Jake thinks about this for a moment, then grins. Cool. Does this mean I can skip morning PT? 6 months later, the Academy has completely restructured their curriculum around what they are now calling the Murphy Method, a revolutionary educational approach that involves trying practical solutions before theoretical ones. Their new motto, carved into the Academy's main entrance, reads, "Sometimes the simple solution is the right one." Jake's first class consists of showing the galaxy's brightest minds how to approach problems by asking basic questions like, what if we just tried talking to them first? And has anyone asked what they actually want? His teaching style involves a lot of shrugging and saying things like, I don't know, just see what happens. Vex becomes his teaching assistant and starts a support group for overthinking aliens. Krill develops a 12-step program for beings addicted to unnecessary complexity. The Academy's graduation rates improve by 300% because students stop getting lost in theoretical rabbit holes and start actually solving problems. The final scene has Jake standing in front of his classroom, looking at a holographic display showing the Academy's new teaching philosophy, and shrugging one more time. Yeah, but honestly, I still don't really know how I did any of that stuff. I just figured if it worked, it worked. And somehow that casual admission that he has no idea what he's doing makes him the most qualified teacher in the galaxy for showing other beings how to stop overthinking and start actually thinking. The universe, it turns out, has a sense of humor after all.